Tuning into this quick overview of interest groups. We'll go over some of the past stuff and some of the new stuff so you can get a grasp of what these interest groups are overall. I will move a little faster through some of the stuff we've covered already in class, so don't worry too much about that stuff. You can always review your notes or ask me any questions. Let's get started. Interest groups, of course, are one of those linkage institutions. Linkage institutions being things that connect you to the government, like political parties, mass media, and elections. They allow your voice to reach the government. They allow you to reach the government and be able to influence the government in many ways. So political parties are able to influence the government by choosing the people running. Elections help choose who the winners are. Mass media allow you to reach out to the government. And interest groups allow you to directly lobby and influence politicians. Now, interest groups have some pros. One of our democratic theories is pluralism. And the idea is that, you know, numerous different groups would push for their ideas, and this would create some sort of compromise between the groups. The politicians would have to listen to these groups, and it would create that filter, that compromise. And you wouldn't have to directly influence government. The groups would do it for you. So they kind of act as a filter and keep out some of the crazier ideas and provide some of the more common ideas, voicing those to the government. Now, on the downside, never mind, on the positive side, Federalist 10 would argue that, of course, this is a great idea. You have a lot of different groups. They're in a huge country, a large republic, and that prevents any one group from becoming too powerful. But the hyper pluralist view would be that maybe you have too powerful of groups in society and the wrong interests get heard, interests that don't necessarily represent the people. Fed 10 is kind of positive, saying that, pluralism is going to best represent the people, whereas Brutus 1 is arguing that, this pluralist system is just going to represent the elites. It's not going to represent everyone. It's going to represent the rich. It's going to represent the powerful. It's going to represent corporations. And that's one of the great fears. Now, here's a basic definition for interest groups. I always say the most important thing to know is that interest groups do not run people, they run ideas. They push for bills, they push for policy changes. They're not running people for office. In fact, they can support all sorts of different people from different parties, and that allows them to essentially be potentially more powerful. Now, we were just talking a moment ago that pluralism could theoretically be bad. When you have iron triangles like we do, there is a chance that some groups that don't necessarily represent the people end up getting very, very powerful. In class, we use the example of weapons manufacturers able to convince government to give them more weapons contracts. And we've talked about earlier in the year that every single time that we increase the federal budget, we're always adding more and more tanks, even though the government, the military leaders have said we don't need tanks. But the tank manufacturers, of course, are influencing government in their own ways. So they're able to get their weapons purchased by the Pentagon, even though they'll just go and sit in the desert in Arizona. The iron triangle is probably one of the most important concepts. Consider it one of those I words that really stands out, like incumbency and, incorporation. It's one of the big ones. Now, interest groups can be very influential to politicians. They have PACs to influence campaigns. They have independent expenditures that can influence campaigns with unlimited money. Independent expenditures can run ads and do whatever they want as long as they don't work with the campaign directly. And of course, they have lobbyists that try to influence government on a daily basis. Lobbyists, of course, are just people that they spend their entire career trying to influence politicians, and they do that by, providing research, providing ideas, providing, concepts to politicians, because politicians are not the experts. The lobbyists fill in the gaps and help them to create policy. Now, on the downside of having lobbyists, since we do allow them, other countries can also have lobbyists. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Now, what do interest groups do? I already mentioned that they just lobby. They attempt to influence public officials. They research. I always say that, if you want to know a lot about gun policy, you turn to the National Rifle Association or Everytown for Gun Safety. If you want to know a lot about civil liberties, you turn to the American Civil Liberties Union. If you want to learn a lot about birds, you turn to the Audubon Society. If you want to learn a lot about specific things, the interest groups have done a lot of research for you, and they're providing that information to the people and to politicians and committees, and they even help you draft legislation about things. So if there's a bird pesticide bill that hurts birds, they could draft a bill about it, trying to get it banned. And if the politicians aren't listening with the lobbying and the research, they could turn directly to the people with what's called grassroots mobilization. It's turning directly to the grassroots, to the people, and try to influence them to influence Congress. So if you ever get a mailer or an email that says, contact your congressman now about this, blah, 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 and it's from an interest group, that's grassroots mobilization. That's them trying to influence you to contact your politician. It's kind of like indirect lobbying, turning you into a lobbyist for their cause. Now, other things they could do, they could sue. Lawsuits can certainly be very influential. I think of the American Civil Liberties Union and all the things they've sued over. Being the backer of Roe v. Wade, being the backer of Brown versus Board of Education, being the supporter of Obergefell v. Hodges. These major court cases were pushed forward by interest groups, not necessarily individuals, because individuals don't have the money to push forward. You of course have amicus briefs. Remember, friend of the court briefs, that an interest group can provide information to the courts. We just talked about interest groups being experts and being very research driven. Of course, they can provide information directly at the Supreme Court too. So that allows them to be even more influential. And lastly, you have electioneering, which of course is those campaign contributions. They can support candidates, they can rate candidates. I always think of the National Rifle Association that grades candidates. They give each one an NRA rating of A through F, and can even showcase how many guns they have if they're willing to reveal those details. Now, one of the major concerns about interest groups is what's called the revolving door, and it's the idea that, when a politician leaves office, they most often turn to becoming a lobbyist if they want to still have a career. And more often than not, they get paid a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars, to be a lobbyist. Why, you may ask? Well, that senator that leaves office now has all the connections in the Senate. So they can turn to all their buddies in the Senate and be like, hey, I'm now lobbying for the pharmaceutical industry, and I'd like to talk to you about, making sure this drug speeds through the system so it gets out to the market really quick. And those other senators are going to be more likely to listen to someone they know rather than some random lobbyist off the street. This is a potential sign of corruption that a lot of other countries would frown upon. And the United States has tried to do things in the past to curb this revolving door. A lot of states have policies that say you have to wait like a year or two before you're allowed to become a lobbyist after you are in a major political area. So they're trying to curb this revolving door problem, because if you have politicians just there to eventually make a boatload of money, it could be seen as a corrupt system. Now, there are different types of interest groups. There's economic interest groups. In economic interest groups, you have groups that represent corporations, called corporate interest groups. You have groups that represent the people that work in companies, called labor unions. So when you think like the teachers union or the firefighters union or the police officers union, they are unions of people trying to fight for better working conditions and better pay for the employees. They have very different interests from the corporate interest groups. Corporate interest groups are looking to make profits for the corporations that back them. Like the pharmaceutical industry wants to make more money for those pharmaceutical industry companies. Or the Chamber of Commerce. Think of the Marshfield Area Chamber of Commerce. If you're a local business that joins this group, they will promote you and advertise you and include you on their gift certificate things. But you're not going to get that if you're not a member of that group. And they're looking to support and get you to shop at those local businesses. And lastly, professional groups can also be in this economic realm, like the American Bar Association that certifies lawyers, and the American Medical Association that helps doctors. They're kind of like they don't really push for labor issues, and they don't push for profits. They're pushing for bettering their field, bettering their profession. And of course, you have a whole other chunk of interest groups. You get groups that are civil liberties groups fighting for civil liberties issues. You get environmental groups. You get good government groups. Those are groups that are trying to make our government less corrupt. Think of the group that hired Jennifer Lawrence to make that video against PACs and the corruption of Citizens United. That is a group that's trying to overturn Citizens United, overturn a bunch of different policies because they want the government to be better and to better represent the people. That's a good government group. You got peace groups fighting for peace. You got church groups. You got single issue groups. These are groups that are only focusing on one area of expertise. And there's quite a few of them. And there certainly can be overlap between many of these groups. And there's some groups like Greenpeace that encompass a good chunk of these groups. So a group doesn't necessarily have to fall in one area. And of course, state and local governments and foreign nations can also act like interest groups in many ways as far as lobbying, but there are limitations as far as what they can do with electioneering. Now, why do people join interest groups? Of course, many people join interest groups for the to support whatever cause it is, a desire to seek change. People join PETA because they're concerned about the issues that PETA is concerned about. But there are a lot of people that join interest groups for benefits, and a lot of interest groups try to offer benefits out there. Like I always think of the AARP. They have a list of benefits, pages on pages long, of all the different discounts you can receive, all the different insurances you can receive, everything that you can get from being a member of this interest group. They could offer magazines, they could offer roadside assistance, and they're trying to provide something tangible because not everyone joins an interest group for a desire to seek change. Sometimes they need something a little bit more to push them over the edge of putting their money into a group's hands. And those benefits can help, push them to do that. Especially when interest groups are facing the ultimate problem, the problem of the free rider. And the free rider is the idea that interest groups can benefit you even if you're not a member of them. If an interest group saves the planet from, devastation, from a meteor hitting the planet, did everyone benefit from it? Yeah, everybody benefited from it. But yes, everyone benefited from that, from that action of that interest group. But is everyone a member of that interest group? No. So all those people are what are considered free riders. They're benefiting from the interest group without ever joining it. I might think like, think of the AARP. If the AARP saves Social Security and Medicare for all of us, do we all benefit someday in the future? You bet we do. But does that mean we're members? No, that doesn't. So since that doesn't mean that we're members, that means we could be potentially free riders. So free riders are, they're people that are benefiting from an interest group without ever having to join them. And there's a good chunk of people out there that are free riders. If you don't think you're a member of an interest group right now, you're probably a free rider. You're probably, one of those free riders that exists. So how can the interest groups fight back against this problem? Well, more selective benefits, more random benefits, and more showcasing of the great things they can do. Whenever there's a big court case that the ACLU wins, they tend to increase membership by showcasing that they were the ones potentially behind that. So taking advantage of those operations can help them fight the ultimate problem, the free rider problem. That's enough for now. I will let you go, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.